What happened to the movie Cocksucker Blues?
What happened? It got, no, that's a whole, this could be another whole show for you. So the Stones introduced me, Mick and Keith, say, had I ever seen a book called The Americans? No fucking way. I'm a Jew from Chicago. I'm not looking at photography books. What's The Americans? They pull it, they show me. I think it was Keith who showed me. It's Robert Frank going with Jack Kerouac, the famous beatnik, and it's On the Road, his famous book. And Robert Frank travels with him and comes out with a code book called The Americans, which are all black and white. So he says, why don't we get Robert Frank to do the cover, the Exile on Main Street cover? It would be great. Look at his photographs, you know. So I tracked down Robert Frank in New York, in the Bowery. He lived at 184 Bowery. Remember it well. He was an amazing. He was probably one of the most major factors in my own consciousness and life. We became very close friends. Another Jewish guy, a little older than me. His father was an appliance dealer in Zurich or something. You know, Jewish appliance dealer. He was a beatnik, and he shot the cover with he didn't use his fancy Leica anymore. He was shooting instant cameras, not Kodak. I mean, Kodak, when they first came out with 35 millimeters point and shoot, he was using that. And so he shot the cover, and the Stones loved all the shots. My picture's on it twice. I'm on that cover, which is amazing. My daughter, she has a big blow up of it, in her house with you wouldn't recognize me then, but, yeah, I became very close with Robert Frank. And then we were in LA, and then they said, well, why don't we do a movie? And I said, great. I mean, they had seen my Bo Diddley movie I told you I made in 1962. Not only did they see it, Ian Stewart, their original member and piano player and road manager, he got it played on BBC Two. And, one time. And so... I said, I want to be a movie producer. Yeah, I'll let's do that. I'll talk to Robert Frank. But I already talked to him about the cover, and he loved the idea because we just loved it. It was another going on tour with the Rolling Stones. He had all kinds of ideas. Super 8 cameras just came out. We'll give each member a Super 8. They can shoot. We'll edit it all later. What they shoot, what I shoot. I want to use Danny Seymour, who's also got a fabulous book, whose father is famous Broadway photographer Seymour. If you go to any of those places, the black and whites of all the Broadway characters. Seymour was married to a socialite from Cape, from where the Kennedys, Hyannisport or somewhere. He was an unusual guy. He was a junkie though. And Robert said, he's a junkie. I want to use him as second camera and sound. I want to use him, but he's a junkie, but I'm sure he'll clean up. I'll get him to clean up. So I meet Danny Seymour and I make a deal. I go to Warner's Film. I forget the old guy there. Oh, God, I can't remember that. Anyway, I made a deal where they paid, I think it was $100,000 advance for first refusal rights to the film. And which they ended up refusing, actually. But they didn't at the time. And we went and made the film. And, it was amazing. Although, as the tour began, Robert became disenchanted more and more with the Stones, with the whole life, with the drugs. Danny went back on drugs. We found his shoes at the curb. I did some of the sound with a Nagra. So it became weird. But my main experience, Robert Frank, he used to give me books to read. Keep the River on the Right. That was the one. That's where about the Amazon. And I ended up going twice because of that book that he turned me on to, to take ayahuasca. He was into it 40 years ago. So Robert Frank turned me on to books, music, all kinds of hippie. He told me I was fucked up. He said, you are fucked up, man. He said, you don't even know who you are, he saw my construct, this egocentric guy, wrote, I was just at the top of my game of being great, and so in Texas, they said, we have to do live. We need the live we can't do the live soundtrack. I call up Yoko Ono and John, they had a film company on White Street in New York. I said, could I use, they had a Steve Gebhardt. They had a film crew headed by this guy, Steve Gebhardt, Bob, I forget his last name. He'll be mad if I don't mention it. Anyway, yeah, you can use the crew. Just pay them. We're not doing anything now. They had some people on weekly salary, whatever, a couple of cameramen, whatever. So they came to Texas, and I knew that the way the Stones work is, by the third or fourth gig on a tour, the set's locked. So it's the same every night, like a Broadway play. It's exact. I mean, Midnight Rambler, he's whipping the floor. It's exact. And I knew that. I was fascinated by that, actually. The whole construction of the tour, how we used to talk after the first one. And I loved that. I was being involved in something creative and new, and I just loved it. Anyway, we would talk about it, and okay, we do the same set every night. So when we did Texas, I said, I have an idea. Steve Gebhardt, the two cameraman, give them headsets with me, and I'll tell them I thought Nick's coming out in 1 minute and kneel down, so they'd know where to aim their cameras. It was like me calling the shots, because I knew the act. I did that. The set ends. It's in Dallas or Houston. We had 2 gigs. We're recording with a live truck, live mobile. I get out to get in our limo with my crew, the Yoko Ono crew, right? We had 2 big black security guys there. I don't know. Can't remember their name at the moment. It'll come to me, although it's not important. This one guy steps in front of me. Man, this is our car. This isn't for your car. He was, and I lost my temper at him. Completely lost my temper. Motherfuckers, this is my car. Rah, rah, rah. Okay, that ended. We ended up getting a car. We left. 3 or 4 days later, in those days, it wasn't like video. You shot, you sent the negative to New York or somewhere. They'd send you rushes back in 2 days, and you'd look at what you got. Robert Frank says, come on in this room, Marshall. I go in a room. He's got a projector, and there's a little screen. He's looking at the rushes, He says, sit down. And he hits the button, and it's me losing my temper without audio. My face was ugly like the devil, like a monster. Close up of me in full temper tantrum. Yeah, I couldn't even, it took me 5 times to look at it. That blew, I can't tell you, it affected my whole life from that moment on, And so he did stuff like that. He was like my surrogate father. I used to go see him in the Bowery. We did the editing in the bar. We rented our own table, with a couple of local kids that he hired to do the editing. Then the Stones were in, so the first edit, I was involved in the editing. And, no one knew what he got. He's the father of realism. We were taking people having sex, the doctor on the plane, the baggage guy eating pussy with the girl on his shoulders on the plane. I'm recording it. No one knew what it was going to be. So we were in Munich, Germany, and I came from New York with a reel of film, 16 millimeter, I guess. Whatever, I think it was Super 16 or 16. And they sat in this screening room, and I put it on. They hated it. Oh my God, they didn't like it. They felt like I did, seeing myself losing my temper. They didn't like a lot of it. There was some stuff with me, they just didn't like it. So they wanted a lot of edits, and they said what they wanted, and Ahmed would say, cut out. There was pictures of Ahmed snorting and smoking. Cut that out, please. I beg you, Marshall. I did. I threw it on the floor for him. He went to my bar mitzvah. Why wouldn't I, No one wanted to be shot that way, And so then, there was a whole scene about the film, and they didn't want it out. They thought it was, it showed too much drugs and too much weirdness. And even though it was highly real, but I will admit, Robert Frank, and he admitted this to me, as he became more malcontent with the tour, the way he edited and shot became malcontent. In other words, he left out the Magnificent Seven shit, all the fun, all the laughter. He left a lot of that out. We were having a good time. The groupies, the music. He left a lot out. He got more into how fucked it was. The whole Rolling Stones. Just it wasn't that healthy to him. It was the opposite of the beatnik thing. He didn't like it. But he knew it was a great document. He liked the film because he was real, you know. But so the Stones owned it. They had the right. Warner's refused on the option. There was a 400 grand. I had a 400 grand. I owned 10% of that film. I had a 400 grand recoupment. Now that same guy that did that I hired my buddy from my dad's advertising is from Roland Binzer, who did Rotary Connection Name and all that. He called me up. He said, "Let me make a music film out of what Yoko, what Yoko and Gebhardt shot. We'll call it, Ladies and Gentlemen, the Rolling Stones. We'll make 2 films." I talked to the Stones. Yeah, great idea. First music film. We'll tour it we're going to open it in New York at the Ziegfeld. We're going to have a rock concert sound system. And because of Al Nero, 3M gave us the first stereo music track on our Ladies and Gentlemen. I can remember that. I went to the grand opening, and Rollins sold it to this guy, Miles. You could look it up. He sold it to a guy who blew it into this distribution of it. And he couldn't, the guy blew it. And the Ladies and Gentlemen thing collapsed. And so the Stones didn't want Cocksucker out. They made a deal that could only be shown at art, like the Museum of Modern Art has shown it numerous times. It could be shown as film art with Robert Frank in attendance, not commercially, not on HBO. I've heard HBO offered $1 million advance for it. I've heard that. I don't know. In the meantime, a video, when video, VHS and all that was the big thing, video, Blockbuster and all that, a company just wanted to buy Ladies and Gentlemen, the music part. And we sold it to them, and they paid $1 million. So I recouped the 400, and I got my 10% on the 600. Okay, what comes around goes around. And someday my kids will get money for Cocksucker when it's on HBO, because it will be, once they can't get sued and we're all dead, I mean, there's a lot of shit in there because I didn't get a lot. A lot of it was my fault as producer. It was impossible to get releases. Willie the baggage man with the girl on his shoulder on the plane eating her, he wasn't going to sign a release. He had a wife and kids, there was a tour doctor who was a sex maniac. He would have cards, white cards with the Rolling Stones logo, the tongue, and he'd look for the prettiest girls in the audience, and he'd write them. Then in every city, we'd have our own suite. We'd want a neutral suite called, we'd make it Mr. White or Mr. Yellow. In case anyone busted us, it would be under no one's name because of drugs or anything. So, so this guy, Larry, I'm not going to say his name, but the doctor, he would hand out cards to all these pretty girls. He'd say, "You want to meet the Stones? Come to this suite at midnight." Or some got girls that were there on dates. He would maybe give out 20 cards. 5 or 6 would show up. It was shocking to meet Mick or Keith or to screw them, And they were never around. Sometimes they would take one. This doctor would have his sweet pickings, and he would say, "Well, I'll introduce you if you it was a trip. It was really that tour was bizarre. And then the wives all came to visit us in Canada. It was crazy. But, that whole scene was crazy. That was the epitome of the groupies and, the plaster casters, all that was going on, It was a lot of fun. That's why I say I would do it all over again, if I had to. But I'm glad I left.
While you're there, Mick Taylor's the replacement guitarist. He ultimately leaves. And, what was really going on amongst the band? Bill Wyman.
Well, what was going on was Mick Taylor, Mick Taylor, they got Mick Taylor because he's just so fucking brilliant of a guitarist. And in my opinion, as a record producer, it was the best overall Stone sound because he played a Les Paul. He played a whole other style of lead guitar than Keith. They coexisted. They're playing together. His lead and Mick's rhythm, and Keith, Mick's lead and Keith's rhythm. To me, as a record producer, it was just genius. Those tracks are brilliant, but he couldn't take it. He couldn't take the pressure of being a Rolling Stone, and he had a wife, Rose, who was very incestuous with other members, and I think it totally destroyed a lot of his something. He did not like being a Rolling Stone. I remember one time he froze. His shoulders would freeze, and he eventually quit. I went to Robert Stigwood. Mick and I went to Robert Stigwood's house. Ahmed was there too. And Eric Clapton, and they were all there at this party Robert Stigwood gave, and we went to Mick Taylor begging him to not leave, but he said he was leaving. And then I saw who it was. It wasn't Mick Taylor. It was someone that was so drunk and ripped Ahmed's shirt. It was terrible. But we left. That's when. And I had known Ron Wood. We were friends before when he was in the Faces. Keith had introduced me to him. We'd gone to his house. He had his own little studio. But Keith and Ron Wood, they play a similar style. They're both brilliant. In fact, if I wanted to get into it, I have a great idea to produce them now. I have an idea for 2 rhythms. But I don't know if I want to get into it, but with them again. But I do have a concept that it doesn't matter who the vocalist is. Just I have a great idea because I always felt they never took advantage of their similarity, and I thought they could do some amazing stuff if it was just directed right.
Okay, so it ends with the Stones. How do we get to today? How long does it take to pick yourself up, and what do you want to do thereafter?
Oh, it ends with the Stones. Yeah, it ends with the Stones, and I quit the Stones. They were upset. They thought, you're quitting because of us. I said, no, I'm not. I'm quitting because of me. And I knew I wanted to stop the drugs. I had tried many times during the last year and a half of the Stones. I had tried drug stopping and failed. Went back, stopped, went back. Very difficult being around Keith, who also was stopping, going back, stopped for the tour. It was difficult. And so I knew what happened is the ending scenario is I would buy methadone from on the black market in New York. And I knew a druggist. We all knew this druggist who, he was part of this. We knew this druggist who was a Rolling Stones groupie, and he would put it in a bottle, make with a label like it was a vitamin C tonic, because I would get sick. I was snorting heroin and stuff. And we were in Montreux, Switzerland, and I went to this fancy 5-star hotel, and I went in the morning. I woke up feeling horrible. I went to the bathroom. I opened that bottle and I drank it, and I looked in the mirror. That was it. That night I quit. I saw myself. All that acid, I guess, did something. Robert Frank, I saw myself the way I really was at that moment. And I quit that night. We all went, I remember in the hotel room telling them I was leaving. I said, otherwise I'm going to die. This is not what, I can't be here anymore. It's time to switch chapters. And they said, oh, it's not our fault. That's what I remember. I said, it's not your fault, obviously. And I left. And then I came back to New York. And I was having a hard time. I used to get 70 phone calls a day. All the son of it was 0, 1, no longer the guy, That's what you learn when you're with the Stones. It's never about you. That's the part that destroys you. It's only about them. They make you think it's about you to get to them. But it's easy to get sucked into that. Yeah. So once that was taken away. So anyway, during one of the last Stones tour, I had met a cocaine smuggler who lived in Bearsville, New York, up where I live now, near Woodstock. Not a dealer, a smuggler, And his deal was he would supply drugs basically to Keith and me for front row tickets of every concert. He'd carry it from gig to gig in Europe. So that was great, We also once had a ex-CIA guy carrying it. No one wants to get busted. So anyway, I called the guy up. I said, I'm coming on board. Come up here, man. Come up, So I drove up from New York to Bearsville, and I was reading the Woodstock Times. There was an ad for this house I'm sitting in now. And I said, man, I need a place to change my, it was time to shift to really get back to my spiritual, the whole thing. And I just said, I want to see that house, something about it. And I spent overnight in a Holiday Inn in Kingston, New York. I came up here the next day. It was sort of dilapidated. It's built 100 years old on 10 acres of land. It was built by the people that owned the Lionel Electric Train Company back in the 20s. They had money, heated floor in the bedroom, but old time, 100 years, And I bought it. I was divorced by then for the bad marriage. I bought it. This was where I was going to clean up and change my life, get back to nature. And I did. That's what happened. Then I met my wife in the city and we ended up moving here. But it took me a long time. That's when I went through the whole therapy, the LSD psychotherapy. I was going to a psychiatrist in Manhattan named Joe Gross. And he said to me, I'm just not doing it with you, but there's a brilliant guy, the father of LSD, psychedelics, coming from Austin, Texas. He's a Russian Jew, a Polish Jew, Harry Hermon, coming in New York. He had to leave Texas. I didn't know why then, but he had to leave for some stupid reason. He had the first marijuana license federal in America, 1960s, for CBD. He invented CBD to grow pot for sleeping. He was that brilliant. He's a pharmacologist, full brilliant psychiatrist. So he said, this guy's coming. And Harry Hermon did not like private patients. He got a job at Kings County, the largest psychiatric hospital, I think, in America, in New York. And he was in forensic. He did the slasher of Staten Island. He did criminals. And his only clients were Lou Reed and me. That was it. Two junkies. Those are his only clients. And he saw me for a year, man. And then he took acid with me, and then we became friends. He ended up moving to Israel. He's dead now. So that's how all that stopped. But in the meantime, I had the house up here, and I met my wife, who was a school teacher, and my life changed. I had kids. Everything changed. Then when my mother had inherited 1983, and my mother died, she had inherited my father's share of Arc Music, which was the Chess Records publishing. That was run by Gene Goodman, that Harry Goodman's brother, another one of Benny Goodman's brothers in New York. That was through Alan Arrow and those people. We knew nothing of copywriting, publishing, international. The original deal, though, was they only owned the chess publishing for not Chess Records. In other words, anything they got, European, anything, other labels, cover records. But when Chess was sold, they had the windfall of getting it all then, because when Chess was sold, that ended. So they owned it, and it was doing great. All the advertising and everything. And my mother was a partner, and my mother died and willed it to me. That was a struggle. That guy Gene Goodman tried to cut me out. I had to break into the office of this Noel Silverman, another big entertainment lawyer, who wrote he had to admit that I had the right to inherit my mother's share. And then I became a partner. And then I threw out Gene Goodman because I caught him. He had my uncle and him were stealing from my mother. And my uncle didn't even know it. And when I showed that to my uncle, we were on Santa Monica Boulevard driving to the Palm or somewhere. And he jammed on the brakes. He freaked out. He never spoke to him. He peed on him at the Friars Club. He didn't realize that he made him a partner, that was such an affront that he would steal from his brother's wife, Oh my God. And so that ruined their friendship. They never spoke after. I showed him. I spelled it out. And instead of going to court and suing Gene Goodman, I told him to go home. I didn't want to start lawsuit. I didn't want it. And I took it over. And I changed it from Madison Avenue to the West Side, 9th Avenue. All young people. We boomed. I made a great publishing company. I ran it for 92 until 2010, when I sold it to Fuji. And now it's owned by BMG. I sold it to Fuji Japan. I made a great company. I loved it. I lived up here. I used to go to the city and sleep 1 or 2 nights a week in hotels, or I had an apartment, my mother-in-law's apartment. And I raised my kids here. My wife was a school teacher, and changed my life. And I made, sold that. And now I've just been working on not becoming me. This is really hard for me. It's against my your old Robert Frank, forget who you are, because it's bullshit. It's just like the shirt you're wearing. You're much more than who you are. He taught me, they laid a lot of good shit on me. I've never been happier in my life. I live in the woods. I walk around the forest. I still take psychedelics. If I can, mushrooms are now every kid I know has a bag of mushrooms, I smoke pot still. I don't take hard drugs anymore. I had serious surgery 3 years ago this month. I had to learn to walk again 2 years ago. It took me a year to learn to walk, laying on the couch. I had double back surgery. I went down to 101 pounds and was near death. and something happened. Again, another undescribable thing. I'm like I get people laughing. I'll get you laughing because I'm happier. Something happened to me when you get near dying, you realize how much time you waste on bullshit. That happened. Something happened to me. I was, on that couch trying to gain weight, a pint of Haagen-Dazs a day. I couldn't gain. I was like the Auschwitz. I looked in the mirror and cried the first time. 101. That's like I was 12 years old at that weight or something. It was horrible. But anyway, it turned out to be a positive thing. You hear about that all the time, right? In life, that weird shit turns out good. And now I'm enjoying riding around in my car, and I'm going to talk to Keith. I recently. Do you think I have a good memory? I'm going to tell you a memory story about the Rolling Stones. Does it sound like an 80-year-old guy that has good memory talking to you?
Yes, I do think you have a good memory.
Okay, you want to hear the story about memory?
Yeah.
It's a Rolling Stone story.
Okay, tell it.
So we're in France and in Switzerland, and we have a tour coming up, and both Keith and I are taking hard drugs, heroin, and everything else, anything you could get. We like drugs, but we knew we had to clean up for the tour. I wanted to, and we had heard about in Marseille, France, there was a drug shortage, and we heard about this Swiss doctor, Dr. Denver, and he said, well, there was a heroin drought in France, and a drug had been invented by a drug company in Paris called Lucidril. You could look it up. It's called many different things, but it was called Lucidril by a French lady, and he wanted to use it on Keith and I for drug cure, and we said okay. And we took it was injectable, and he gave you barbiturates to sleep through the sickness, but it was mostly this Lucidril. We took hundreds of these pills, big bottles, and I saw him many times. 3 or 4 cures I took with him, trying. 3 for sure. Keith, maybe 2 or 3. And then it ended, and it didn't cure us. We went back, and I ended up coming here doing what I told you to cure. But recently I decided, I wonder what happened to that Lucidril. So I look it up online, and it's one of the drugs given for Alzheimer's to remove plaque in your brain. So I think in our 30s, Keith and I started fresh. We cleaned out all the shit. I want to call him and ask him, how's your memory? Because everyone I know tells me it's shocking. My memory, other 80-year-olds, and it's true. I feel that things come up from way, and I'm wondering if that we're laughing. Could it be the Lucidril? End of story.
And on that note, Marshall, we'll leave it here for the first chapter. You're a fount of stories, well told. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to my audience.
You asked good questions. You were good. Thanks for listening. See you at the next podcast.